Okay, so now the next 30 minutes is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Myself and my colleague Tristan Kuisis will be presenting these slides. It is our pleasure to speak to you today on energy optimization, modeling, and investment strategies for generation, transmission, and distribution. Thank you. Next slide. We hope to bring to the discussion our international experience on energy system least cost investment optimization, and we touch on best practices, lessons learned, and challenges. Next slide. Next slide. In terms of international best practices, the European Union established the European Network of Transmission System Operators, ENTSO-E, the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas, ENTSO-E-G, and provided legal mandates to manage the internal energy market in Europe. The aim is to liberalize the gas and electricity markets in the EU and provide a pan-European transmission system. The main objectives are to integrate renewable energy resources into the energy system, ensure affordability, sustainability, and security, stimulate cross-border trade, and ensure efficient management and coordinated operation of the EU gas market. Next slide, please. ENTSO's 2020 goals are to increase the share of renewable energy to 20%, reduce the greenhouse gases by 20%, and increase energy efficiency by 20%. 2030 goals are to achieve 55% reduction in greenhouse gases. 2050 goals are to achieve full decarbonization. For this to succeed, this requires voluntary cooperation of member countries from a policy standpoint. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there are many global energy system events that we can learn from. Just a few are listed below. The Texas extreme weather and load shedding event. This brings to mind climate resilience. The UK load shedding event, increased renewable generation and insufficient ancillary services. South African load shedding, aging thermal generation fleet, and a slow rollout of renewable energy generation, storage, and transmission infrastructure. Central Asia hydro generation risk from changing hydrology and glacial water flows. The Fukushima nuclear generation incident, climate resilience again. Barbados fault level reduction projection based on the planned increase of renewable energy generation up to 100% renewable generation by 2035 and 50% by 2030. And the California load shedding event, which highlighted insufficient capacity and the need for a capacity market. Next slide, please. So planning has to evolve from a reliability, least cost, and deterministic model to the right-hand side of the picture to a resilience, least regret, or best cost and probabilistic planning model. Resilience planning is the ability to withstand disruptive events, and best cost planning considers climate, environmental, resilience, and other costs. Next slide, please. Historically, electricity demand was predictable. Thermal and hydro generation technologies were dispatchable, and they met the demand, and new generation was introduced to replace retired generation. Today, Energy substitution to electricity is increasing. Example, electric vehicles and electrical cooking. Thermal fossil fuel generation harms the environment and is often inflexible to cope with modern systems and renewable energy. Old coal stations and old steam gas stations are very inflexible. Aging and retiring thermal generation requires replacement with new generation and with variable renewable generation and energy storage systems. And the grid needs to adapt to satisfy this changing energy landscape. Next slide, please. The challenges of modern power systems include legacy and aging generation, intermittency from renewables, reduced inertia from inverter-based generation, decreased fault levels from inverter-based generation, and the mitigation to decreased fault levels are synchronous condensers, which not only provide inertia and dynamic voltage response, but also provide the fault level. Seasonality, storage to compensate for renewable energy patterns, way leaves and capital for new transmission lines and transmission systems, extreme weather events. Load duration curves and average load and average generation are no longer sufficient. Hourly stochastic analysis these days is required for effective planning and operation of a power system. Next slide, please. So modeling today is required over many weather years, and modeling must be chronological. That means hour by hour, not just average values, and not just hour by hour for the year, but hour by hour for future years as well. And times of peak, renewable generation and storage, charging and discharging don't coincide, and they all need to be understood and managed and modeled correctly. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure you are all well aware of, Thailand is part of the Greater Mekong and the ASEAN countries. Similar to ENSO, it is an interconnected system. Next slide, please. So Mekong and ASEAN countries are on an energy transition pathway, just like the rest of the world. All these countries are experiencing the effects of climate change. Benefits from regional integration include the following: weather diversity and resilience. What does that mean? Well, it means if the sun is shining here, not shining here, it might be shining here. If the wind is not blowing here, it might be blowing here. So if you've got an interconnected system, you are getting a reserve and you are getting diversity in generation. And resilience, if there's a very bad storm in this part of the country, the other part of the country is not experiencing the storm. Or if this country has a bad weather event, the other does not. And as an interconnected system, the countries can help each other and the regions can help each other. And if countries are interconnected, there's a reduced requirement for reserve. Instead of the reserve being an arithmetic sum, all the reserves are pooled and there's a probabilistic sum that is much reduced. Overall, it'll lower the cost of electricity because it's just the cost of transmission interconnectors rather than each country having to build its own autonomous generation. Interconnected countries can incorporate more renewable generation, and but new transmission requirements and ancillary services requirements are going to need to be relooked at as the renewable generation increases. Next slide, please. And I will thank you for your attention, and I will now hand over to my colleague, Tristan Kuisis. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. So I think within the past few sessions, we've discussed some of the challenges, some of the new technologies that we're seeing being introduced into the power system from a generation standpoint from EGAT, and then looking at the different distribution networks in Thailand as well, and some of the challenges around that, particularly in areas where there's potential high amount of environmental sensitivity. Now, then we went on to Victor, who spoke about some of the challenges and how to deal with these, some of the technologies to overcome some of the challenges with increased RE. Now, what we do still need to understand is that as engineers, as planners, we are going through this energy transition where historically it was a lot simpler to do this planning. Understanding that you have a certain electrical demand and you need to meet this electrical demand with some new generation candidate. As Paul mentioned, historically it was a lot simpler to do that because you had firm dispatchable generation that used fossil fuel power plants. But now we're moving to a space where we have to look at all of these other constraints in the system. So as a planner, we need to understand these long-term energy systems requirements. And fortunately, there are tools to help us out with this. There are a range of tools available that, for the most part, are only commercially available and very expensive. But they have assisted planners and engineers on this process of designing the future energy system. And over the past few months, Paul, myself, Victor, and a couple of other colleagues have been working closely with KMUTT to introduce a new tool called PIPESA, Python for Power Systems Analysis. And what are we doing here? We're using this tool to optimize social welfare for a country, for a region. So next slide, please. So what is this tool? Python for Power Systems Analysis is a free software toolbox for simulating and optimizing modern electrical power systems over multiple periods. So some of the topics that we've discussed today, PIPESA is a really useful tool for helping us understand the system, helping us design it, looking at what are the potential decisions that we can make. And with this tool being free and open source, it means that you don't need to be a government utility to use it. You can be a researcher from a university. You can be starting up your own business and looking to understand a power system and provide support to governments. So what else do we know about PIPESA? So PIPESA includes models for conventional generators with unit commitment, variable renewable generation, storage units coupling to other energy sectors, and mixed alternating and direct current networks. So on the bottom left there, you can see an example power system that looks not only at your electrical network, not only at your electrical generators and your electrical demand, but also at other sectors in a country. So what about if you need to understand the heat energy required during cold periods in the year? Some countries have historically made use of combined heat and power plants to provide power to towns while leveraging the excess heat energy from these thermal power plants. On top of this, PIPESA is very useful for looking at other parts of other sectors, potentially looking at transport as well, which, as we have discussed today, is something that's going to become more and more important, looking at the introduction of more EVs on your system. Next slide, please. So PIPESA developed by a number of universities and researchers from around the world, has grown, and there's a large user base. We are currently using it, and we've been working with KMUTT to use this as part of the project's evaluation. And this is one of the tools that we see that's going to assist in this energy transition and helping planners and governments and countries move forward along this process. So the next few slides that I have over here, I'm not going to go through because I know we are now a little bit over time. But please take the time to go through this, to have a look at some of the capabilities of PIPESA, what you can do with it. It's not only looking at planning a whole from a country point of view. Sometimes it's looking at assessing the cost benefit analysis of a rooftop solar in your own house. What size batteries do you need? How many panels do you need? And this is where we think it's a perfect tool for many people to start using in this space. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just having a look at some of the other existing tools in the space, you can get an idea of where PIPESA fits in, having the unique space of allowing you to look at the power system from running load flows, and then also on the other end, looking at the economic side of things and investment optimization. All right, so I think you can go to the last slide of our session over here. So yeah, so this is just a look at why we believe PIPESA is so useful. As I mentioned earlier, it's free and open source. And the benefits of this is that historically, these tools have been closed. You had to pay for them. A lot of the analysis and the data that went into these processes was not known to many people. But now we are seeing this change where with these new tools, we're looking at open data, open source tools to actually conduct these optimization problems. And then right at the other end is also providing open data for the results. So everyone from engineers, scientists, modelers, and policymakers can understand and have their say in the process of this planning, which ultimately assists in the end goal of providing of optimizing social welfare.